Hi, I'm Alison Beckles, and you are listening to Best Fails, the podcast where we share our stories of failure, explore their impact, and reflect on what we learned. Today's guest is Kate Dean, whose failure sheds light on some of the challenges faced by those who are neurodivergent within the educational sector, while highlighting the importance of leveraging our interests and strengths to fuel success. Now let's get into it. Welcome, Kate, to Best Feels. It is so wonderful to have you here. We've been having an ongoing relationship for the last year or so, so this is great to kind of have you in my space. So, Kate, what I'm going to do now is just kind of tell everybody who you are, a little bit more about what your expertise is, what you do for a living, all of that type of stuff, so that they just have a flavor, just a little bit of a taste of who Kate really is. So, Kate Dean spent over 10 years leading and managing student-facing disability support teams in universities before setting up Enable Disability and Inclusion Consultants in March 2020. She has lots of experience of identifying appropriate adjustments and enabling strategies that allow people to work to their strengths, working across a wide range of disabilities and long-term conditions, but particularly specializes in neurodiversity, mental health, and hidden disabilities. Kate now works with organizations to provide end-to-end solutions, focused support to deliver specialist consultancy, audits, training, and individual workplace assessments to identify and remove barriers to high performance in the workplace. Kate also brings her own lived experience and the strengths of neurodiversity to her work. So, Kate, thank you for joining me on Best Feels. I am so pleased to have you here today.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me, Alison. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So, that's just a flavor of all of your professional experience. You sound like you do so much, have worked so much, but we want to know a little bit more about who Kate is as a person. Who was little Kate when she was a little girl growing up and so forth? Do you have brothers and sisters? What was your family life like? So give us a little bit of a flavor of who Kate is.
Okay, so little Kate spent most of her time in the 80s growing up on roller boots. Little Kate didn't realise that she was dyspraxic at the time, so spent a lot of the time starting off on roller boots and then on the floor. I have an older brother who is never off the phone, but we don't really know what goes on in each other's lives, but we're kind of close, but we don't really talk about real life stuff. So I suppose that's quite a good thing. No, I've come from a very small but very close family, very close to my parents. Unfortunately, we lost my dad 9 years ago, but we celebrate him every single day. I've always kind of valued those really kind of close relationships. I have a very close-knit circle of friends, but we've been friends for over 20 years. So for me, that's absolutely, I think it's probably part of neurodivergence as well, but those deep and meaningful relationships. I'm married. I've been married with my husband for 20 years. Again, we laugh every day. We have a really nice time, and we have a big hairy dog who jumps on the bed every morning and has probably done some damage to our internal organs.
Be making a special appearance sometime today.
No, he is downstairs, just in case a special appearance. Just in case he was thinking of his cameo, because he might have done that once or twice when he was a puppy.
But not no.
No, never to be repeated.
So, because this is a podcast about failure, when you think back about failure, what is your earliest memory of the experience of failure when you were a child?
I think kind of reflecting back, and again, I think, now I understand who I am. I understand my neurodivergence, and for the most part, I very much work to the strengths of my neurodivergence. But certainly growing up, I was a creative child, but I think my artistic abilities probably capped off when I was about 7 or 8. So I never really progressed past there. I was always very enthusiastic, but was always the last kid to be picked for sports teams. I was never any good at any sports. My hand-eye coordination wasn't great. I was in the school volleyball team, and I think I managed to we won a Lancashire championship of volleyball teams, and I think I was the only member of the squad that got a medal without changing out of my school uniform. So I don't think my talents were required in that, but I still got the medal to show for it. I tried various musical instruments. Wasn't particularly coordinated. I love music, but but really, I think I don't think, even though there were things that I wanted to do and would get very frustrated doing them, and any new hobby, and again, very much an ADHD trait, would be to get super into something and super involved. But then if I couldn't master it straight away, would become very frustrated and just move on to something else. And so I think, but I think I sort of was still quite enthusiastic. That I think that's probably a really nice thing for the beauty of youth, that you just kind of are quite resilient with those things and move on.
I have a bit of a game for us to play. It is Where Should We Begin by Esther Perel. I don't remember the name because it was not coming to me before.
So we all get there in time.
Yeah. So the goal of the game is she just have like a whole host of questions. So I'll randomly pick these, and what I'll do is I'll go first in terms of answering the question, because you're my guest. Give you some time to kind of gather your thoughts and think about how you would want to answer. So I'll put that pressure on myself. So our first card, the most difficult decision that I've had to make. There are two that have come into my mind. So one of them, the first one that came to mind, had to do with I guess actually the thing that started me on my own failure journey and this whole pathway of trying to understand failure a little bit was I started a business with some friends from university, and we were having such a blast. But at a point in time, I felt like either as a person, like if I described the company as a dress or the business as a dress, like it wasn't fitting me anymore. Either I'd gone too small, I'd gone too big, my dimensions had changed, etc. And I didn't feel like it was a good fit. And it took me 4 years. And in the back of my mind, I was like, I probably need to change this out. I probably need to do something different. And it was such a hard decision to make because I enjoyed the relationship that we had. I was struggling with feelings of, oh my goodness, I'm going to let down this person. I'm going to let down my partner, all of this kind of stuff. And then also knowing that this is not fitting me the way that I want it to fit me anymore. It took me 4 years, kids, to finally say, I got to leave. I'm going to have to leave. It was hard. So that is mine.
Sounds it. Yeah, because so many things involved in that of kind of relationships, and it's not just a straightforward decision. There's complexity involved in that.
Exactly. Yeah. How about you? What is the most difficult decision you've had to make?
I think probably one that springs to mind is probably making the decision to start my own business.
Yeah.
So in March 2020, I'd had this idea that I wanted to start my own business, but I didn't really know how to start or what to do, and there was a rather significant other event that happened in March 2020 as well. I don't know if you possibly remember it. Something. And I was working full time at the time, and I thought, oh, this is not a good time to start a business. And then actually, because the world turned on its head, and because everyone was working from home, and the college that I was working for at that point were really flexible about how we did our work, what hours we did, as long as the work got done. That I was like, well, actually, hang on, I can extend my days, and rather than being in an office for 40 hours a week, I can do that work from home, but I can also build in meetings as well. Yeah. And so I was like, okay then, well, let's try it and see what happens. And I think for me, I've always had aspirations. I've always kind of dreamt big, but then in line with sort of classic female ADHD, have terrible imposter syndrome that is still sits on my shoulder every day with everything I do, and is my the worst critic you could ever imagine. If you
Yeah.
met someone that was as critical as that, you would remove them from your lives instantly. But I think it was my husband that said to me, "Don't let confidence be the only thing that holds you back." And
No.
and it's such an important statement, and it was so important to give me that push to of self-belief that comes from others believing in me. And so here I am into year 5, but making that decision was a tough one, because you've got to make the decision, but then you've got to make it happen.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so 4 years on, here I am, and somehow it's
Wow.
working.
Yep. Those difficult decisions, boy. Those difficult decisions. Ooh, this is a good one. So, what is something that people often misunderstand about me? So, something that people often misunderstand about me, what do I think people often misunderstand about me? That's a very good question for me. I don't know. I wonder sometimes if, I might give off the impression that I am too nice.
Oh,
So,
really? Is there a hidden version of you?
no. Well,
I
I
want to
mean,
see it.
we have conversations in our heads about certain things and so forth. Probably things that I sometimes might not have the confidence to say, but it might be going on in my head. Yeah, I don't know. Generally, like I can't think of a thing immediately. I'm quite sure that 2 hours from now, once this recording is over, something probably pop into my mind. But immediately, I don't know if I could think about something that people tend to misunderstand about me.
But I think that's nice. What you see is what you get, and that's refreshing. And I think that generally that's kind of what I say about myself, that
Yeah,
there aren't really any sort of like hidden corners or crevices in my personality. It's kind of here. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, I think my initial thought with that is, I think for me, I think people possibly think that I am more extroverted than I am. I'm actually a real introvert. I can turn it on when it suits, and
yeah,
when necessary. And I always remember thinking about a sort of team development session we did one year, around that whole kind of, is there a work you and a personal life you? And I always thought, no, that there really isn't. But actually, I think there is. I think I'm much quiet. Well, I'm not quiet. People that know me know I'm not quiet. But I think I'm not. But I think internally there is this, massive imposter syndrome that doubts
mhm,
everything that I do, that questions everything that I've said, that constantly compares myself to other people. And I think potentially, I think maybe I don't present that way, but actually in here, I give
yes,
myself a really hard time, and it would be really nice to just turn that voice off. Um,
yeah,
but actually within that, there's almost that thing where it kind of keeps me on my toes, and it keeps me striving forward to be better and to do better. But I just think sometimes my expectations of myself, I would love to be one of those really arrogant people that are just like,
yes, I can do it.
I can do it. And then actually, if you look at whatever that is, you're like, wow. Whereas, but I mean, what a beautiful, harmonious place to be in your own head of like, I'm not good.
Last question. Um, a time, a time I wished I dealt with conflict differently. A time I wish I dealt with conflict differently. There are so many times. I, I am so conflict averse. I am
No,
terrible.
I was flawless with everything.
There are so many examples that I could give. I'll just use one, like personal to me. Um I've had, and this isn't even just a specific one, but this is just my history. I have a history of Like if something is a conflict, I try to get it smooth over as quickly as possible. And sometimes what that does is that it does not allow us to address the issues properly. My husband, kid, when I married this man,
Tell me.
he is the opposite. He don't understand the whole idea of leaving the little dust speck, one dust speck under the carpet. We would be up at 4 o'clock on mornings having to go to work that same day because he wants to deal with the conflict. And I would have hours of silence. And he would sit through the hours of silence. That man is an angel. And he taught me, honestly, that it isn't just about covering up the surface or saying, oh, I'm sorry. It is like, what is it that caused this conflict in the first place? What's the misunderstanding? What happened? Let's deal with that. And that has been helpful. I still have my tweaks of, having to deal with it, but I am much better. But I still have work to do. That's me.
Well, when you asked that question, the first word that I just wrote down is resolution. For me, yeah, I have to. Something has to be resolved properly for me to move on. It's that authenticity for me is just absolutely cuts through to the core of me. I can't, I can't deal with those awful, awkward conversations where you both know that it's not resolved. And lots of the work that I do now is about trying to really resolve conflict because otherwise it's pointless. And I mean, I hate conflict. I hate conflict, but there have been times, probably more professionally, to be honest, than personally, where I've been in conflict situations. And there's been some pretty big battles that have happened because I don't like being lied to. Whatever the truth is, I want to know the truth.
Yeah.
And again, probably in line with lots of ADHDers have come into some sticky situations in employment where there has been that, that, I won't say the word, but an untruth. That I know you're lying. You know you're lying. We can both see through it. Should we not do this? Just tell me. Whatever it is, I'd prefer you to be straight with me rather than we sit here with this merry dance and walk away both thinking, well, that was a waste of time. And so, there have been times where, I've hit the roof, I think is probably the term, when I've been lied to. And that, emotional regulation is not a strength of mine. For the most part, I experience positive emotions intensely, but I can also experience the opposite side. If there's that injustice, if there's that, you're not telling me the truth, and I know that that's the case. So I think for me, things have to be resolved, because if they're not resolved, well, I hate that. I hate that feeling that just carries with you. Like, I'd much prefer to just, right, let's get it out of the way. Let's sit down. Let's get to the bottom of it, and let's move on peacefully and harmoniously and authentically, rather than we know that, because then trust breaks at that point. And so, not having trust in a relationship for me is then we're done. So yes, so I can't say I'm at my best in a conflict situation. I do get too emotional with things, but it comes from a good place. It might not be executed in the the best way.
Yeah. So I have kept you talking about these questions, but this was still very good, So we are going to be going into the section now where you tell us about your failure story, your failure experience. So Kate, my attention is fully on you.
No pressure.
No pressure at all.
So after I'd spent the 80s on roller boots, in American tan tights, I should say as well, because I was obsessed with them, with ankle socks over the top. It was quite a look. So yeah, spent the 80s on roller boots, and then so at the beginning of the 90s, I started high school, secondary education, and I'd always kind of gone along, and but now looking back, I was different, and very often you hear about neurodivergent people feeling different, but again for me, and I attribute this to my family. It never felt like a negative difference
Yeah.
necessarily. I mean, I was at 9 organizing like a bring and buy sale for the ozone layer and things like that. I was like the
Wow.
that kid.
Yeah.
And was always like super creative and off doing different things. And but when I was 12 and I was at secondary school, I used to love it when the local fair came to town once a year. It was so exciting. But at the age of 12, I was on a fairground ride and I had an accident on it. And a few people were injured on this particular ride. And I chipped my collarbone and fractured my elbow. And because of that, the health and safety executive got involved. And there was another girl from my school who'd broken her back. There was some, like, it was really serious, like this ride.
Wow.
And because of that, I then had to, at the age of 12, go and be part of a court hearing, which was the health and safety executive prosecuting this fair.
Wow.
And I remember going to the Crown Court in Preston, which was near where I grew up, and seeing these people, and I'd never had any experience of it. I mean, you wouldn't do that now at all, just send a 12-year-old into Crown Court. But seeing these people in wigs and gowns, these white sort of wigs and these long black gowns, and there's the judge sat there behind this like oak panelled desk, and he's in red with his white wig on, and then like these questions are just being fired at me, and I don't even think I went with anyone. So, and I just remember coming out going, "Wow, I want to do that job."
Oh, wow.
And that job was a barrister. And
Yeah.
so from the age of 12, right, decision made. I know where my future's headed. I want to be that person that fires questions at a 12-year-old on her own. But it was so, I mean, the sort of theatre involved in a Crown Court, and I was just fascinated by it. So all kind of my way through education, I ended up. So I was rubbish at musical instruments. I was rubbish at sports, but happy-go-lucky with it. But then my English teacher at the time said, "Have you thought about public speaking?" I was like, "I don't even know what that is." So I ended up entering a number of public speaking competitions, and was fairly successful with it. And then also as part of then kind of school and then college, they used to organise these bar mock trials. So in Manchester Crown Court, in Liverpool Crown Court, they'd get local schools and colleges to come along, and you'd have to present a case. There was like a sort of a mock trial basically. And so you got to dress up in the wig and the gown and present your case. So I was absolutely in my element at that point. And just, I mean, I don't know where these wigs and gowns had come from. I probably don't want to know. But I mean, suddenly you feel so kind of self-important, and so even more that aspiration was like, absolutely, this is what I'm going to do. So the plan kind of rumbled on, and I got to so I sort of went through GCSEs, and on reflection probably could have done a lot better, but kind of got through them and all was fine. I got to the point of A-levels, and I knew that I wanted to go to Cardiff University. So that would have been in 98.
Yeah.
Go to Cardiff University, do my law degree, follow that, pursue that dream of becoming a barrister. And I distinctly remember trying to revise for my A-levels. And the thing that I remember most about it was sat doing my revision timetable that was all colour coded, but it probably wasn't colour coded, but it had colours on it. I was never organised to be colour coded. But then by the time I'd finished my revision timetable, I'd realised that I'd lost a day. So I then needed to redo my revision timetable.
Yeah.
Now, I now understand that that's procrastination. And something that, yes, I still battle with regularly. And so I kind of went in and did my A-levels. And I remember going to pick up, my mum took me to pick up my A-level results on the day that they came out in August, with a view to then going to Cardiff in the September. And it was a provisional offer based on me getting, I can't even remember what the grades were.
Yeah.
And when I went in and picked up the grades that weren't the grades that I needed to get into Cardiff, for me, the world just crumbled around me of like, because really I'd kind of sailed through, and I don't mean to sound arrogant with that. I'd just been really lucky of how I just kind of found my way somehow. But that was the point where I was like, oh my God, I've failed. And it wasn't that I just missed the grades. I think I can't even remember what it was. Say it was something like 3 Bs or an A and 2 Bs or something like that. I think I got 1 B, an E, and an N, which wasn't even a pass.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? Yeah. I mean, obviously, like, you didn't do the revision, so of course you're not going to be able to do the exam.
Yeah.
Being part of it. But then kind of going home and being in floods of tears all the way home, and then walking in, and our family was always the one that was like, oh, I've got some really bad news, only joking, kind of thing.
Right.
So my dad and brother were sat there going, well, how did you get on? And I'm like, no, go on, how did you get on? And so this agony of sharing this story that I'd failed and hadn't got to, my life plan, obviously set at 12, and this point being 18. And then just going into this complete tailspin of, well, what do I do now? And I distinctly remember, the newspapers that came out at the time that had all the kind of clearing places listed of all the courses that were still available in different universities. And I remember seeing, I think there was something at like one of the Liverpool universities that was like cultural studies or something. That was like, I'm going to go and do that. Right. And just literally just trying to grab onto, and again, impulsive decision making, just to try and find our way forward. So anyway, I ended up kind of reflecting on it, and I decided that no, I'm going to go back to college and I'm going to do some more A levels. So as it had turned out, the end result that I'd got actually got upgraded to a D. So it meant I'd passed 3. And so I went back and I did some more A levels. So I've actually ended up with five A levels and an AS level, whereas most people kind of get 3 A levels. And I decided that that then after that point, because again, everything has just taken me longer than anybody else, with most things in my life. But when I got those A levels, I got 2 A's for those. And then I decided, actually, now I've had enough of education. I'm going to go and work for a bit. So I decided to go to work for the Crown Prosecution Service in Manchester. So I worked there for 2 years, and it was at the time, it wasn't the area that I was covering, but it was the time that, if you remember Harold Shipman, the GP, that murdered a load of old ladies, it was the time that his case broke.
Him. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So at the end of the 90s, so kind of working in that, and I mean, it was, it was fascinating because I was so interested in, crime, basically. And so I said, no, I'm going to go and work. So I, worked in the sort of administration team. I'm going to go and work for the Crown Prosecution Service, and I'm going to go to university as a mature student at 21. Because it will give me some experience that will set me apart from other law graduates when I graduate, and then that will help me to become a barrister. So, after the face of failure, I'm then kind of moving towards this thing. So did that, then applied to Sheffield University, and because I was a mature student, apparently, just got an unconditional place. And I was like, brilliant, this is not like riding on any exams, so all the pressure was off. So I arrived in Sheffield in 2001, and to go and do my law degree. And I was like, okay, right, this is happening. And I started off, so I did, because I just wanted to do criminal law. When I then had to do contract law, tort law, I was like, oh my God, is this what studying law is? This is like, it's deliberately written in a language that you need to pay a person lots of money to understand. It's meant to keep the plebs out.
Yeah.
And so I went through, and then it came to the point of me doing my contract law exam. And again, I went through this process where I was like, I don't know how to revise for an exam. I don't know how to fit all of this information in my head. And I certainly don't know in an exam process how to perform in this, because this doesn't sit with who I am and how I work. I need to write about stuff and
Yeah.
so in my contract law exam I got 15%. And I don't know how I managed to get 15% because I only wrote my name.
Maybe it was valued at 50%.
But I remember coming out of that exam and phoning my dad, and again being in floods of tears and just being like, oh, and he's like, don't worry, you can resit it, like it's, blah 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 blah. It was all fine. But just getting to the end of my first year of law and just thinking, what am I doing? Like this is
Wow.
not for me. And actually, is this going to be another kind of like
Yeah. Yeah.
revision to my kind of life plan? And again, feeling that real sense of failure, that why can't you just do
Yeah.
what you want to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so anyway, then I decided to go back into first year. So
Yeah.
everything's
Yeah.
like add a year.
Yeah.
Went back into first year and did a criminology degree, criminology and social policy. And I'm like, oh, this is what I wanted to do. I just didn't know what the name was for it. So let's like study like
Yeah.
internet crime. That was like a
Yeah.
new thing at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's look at kind of offending behaviour and sentencing
Yeah.
of courts. And I was like, oh, brilliant. So I got my criminology degree, and then I came out of university, and I worked at a couple of places, but started to work for Victim Support, which is a charity that supports victims of crime, and started to work and specialise in domestic abuse, which is something that I absolutely loved and I'm still super passionate about. But unfortunately, what are we, 15, 20 years on, and we're still no further ahead, in terms of getting justice for people. And I distinctly remember attending a Crown Court with somebody that had taken them years to get to the point of even phoning the police on their partner, let alone getting to court. And it had got so bad that that this guy had slashed her around the face with a samurai sword. It was really serious. And I remember, so she was trembling. So we went into like the witness room in Crown Court, and I just remember this barrister sweeping in, gown and wig. Good news. We've decided to do a plea bargain, so you won't need to give evidence. So he's pleaded guilty to a lesser offence, which is quite common. And because of that, he's been remanded in custody, but because of the time he's already served in custody, he's going to be released today. What?
Good
So
news.
he's downstairs in this building, this woman that is absolutely terrified of this guy.
This man.
And at that point, and I've just got chills now, that was the point where I was like, thank God I did not pursue that as a career, because that's not me. There's no way I could ever play chess with people's lives. And at that point, I just thought, do you know what? There's no justice in the criminal justice system. And and I know there is justice for some people, but there are often horrendous miscarriages of justice for that people are banged up for stuff. But working in domestic abuse, and it's something that took its toll on me, because you hear the worst of humanity.
Yeah, it's an
you know,
emotional
and,
work.
yeah, and then I spotted a job at. So I was in Manchester at the time, and I spotted a job at Salford University, and it was with the Students' Union. And I was like, I'm going to apply for that. And so went to go and work there, and was very quickly poached by the disability team, and fell into working in disability and absolutely loved it. And that is what, over 15 years ago. And I've never looked back. And
Wow.
I just think that whole, for me, that whole thing of, you don't have to, even though I was really clear about the plan that what I was going to do, how I was going to get there, it doesn't always work out like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually, sometimes you really need to. There's moments of reflection, I think, in life where you're like, "That was a lucky escape,"
Yeah. Yeah.
and sometimes it finds you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and I think for me, like now I look back on all of those, what I saw as failure at the time, and actually it just wasn't meant to be. And
Right.
I don't think that's me trying to like rewrite history because I desperately wanted it, but I know now doing what I do now gives me my dopamine hits. It gives I'm so well. I mean, you've met me before, haven't you? You know I'm passionate about what I talk about.
Yeah.
But I think for me, finding this work is that thing that I wanted all along. I thought it was the law, and it's not the law. And so I think that, but I think my experience through education is definitely not the worst. Experience that lots of neurodivergent people have. Lots of people have real kind of trauma and scars that's left from growing up in a deficit model of always being told that you're wrong and you're different and you're weird and you're lazy and you're thick and you're stupid. Those words that you would have thought were like left back in the 50s, actually they're still there. All my school reports were like, Katie would be, so much better at maths if she just stopped talking and applied herself.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I wouldn't, because my brain doesn't process numbers. And I'm
Yeah.
talking because this is boring, it doesn't stimulate me.
Yeah. 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 Because actually, as you were talking, one of the things that I was wondering was like when you think about the all the tort law, all of those, even the way that it was written and so forth, and then like how you found like a home and you found all kinds of stuff with the criminology, like what got you to pass the criminology?
I think the most important thing was it interests me. And then it stimulated me. And for an ADHD brain, that is absolutely a fundamental. If we're not stimulated, we're not going to do it. And so even though like kind of writing assignments and doing all of that stuff, like I'd have a really good idea, but then actually getting started and doing it was a different matter.
Yeah.
And it's only just now, like 20 years on, that I've started having those dreams that actually, oh, I haven't finished that assignment and I'm not
Ah.
going to get my degree.
Yeah.
But I think the subject was interesting. The it just interests me. It just got me. And it's the name I didn't have for
Yeah.
something because I
Yeah.
thought that was the law. It,
Yeah.
it was more about that kind of application of stuff. It was more immersive. It wasn't just
Right. Got it.
reading case law and legislation that's written in a different language deliberately. And so for me, that much more immersive way of working and being very practical and pragmatic, and that's lots of the stuff that I like to do now, of that problem solving and looking at how we improve things and all those kind of things, that actually can't do that with the law because lots of that is about following rules. I'm not
Yeah.
very good at following rules.
Yeah. 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 So when you think about, and because we talked about the yellow brick road, and those barriers that are faced by persons who are neurodiverse within education, like when you think back about your experience and even working with the disability unit at the university, what are some of those things that stand in the way of persons who are neurodiverse actually succeeding through university?
A lot, really. So one project that we started to do was with the National Autistic Society, and it was linked in with some research that was happening at the university at the time, looking at for autistic students transitioning into university. How do and for me, this is one of the massive issues for higher education generally. How do you communicate to a new student starting with you the difference between school, college, and university?
Yes.
So what we've seen is there is more expectation because the fees are
Yeah.
sky high,
Yeah. Yeah.
but also this expectation around that university is going to be more like school. But universities don't go as far to clarify those differences. Um,
Yes.
but also for lots of autistic students, going from a very structured timetable where every hour is filled and you need to be somewhere to this kind of wafty kind of, you've got
Yes.
lectures a week, and well, what are you meant to do with the rest of the time?
Yeah.
And so lots of autistic students would get very anxious around that, just not know what they were meant to be doing. Then I think you look at the lecture scenario, and if your cognitive, the cognitive impact of whether it be neurodiversity, whether it be a mental health condition, whether it be a chronic pain condition that has that cognitive impact, and you go into a lecture and you've got slides up on the board that on the screen that perhaps you haven't had access to the presentation beforehand.
Before.
You've got somebody talking around those slides, and then you've got to try and process all of that information, take down the information from the board, try and pick out the succinct points. So you just end up with kind of half-written sentences that when you come to look back at your notes, you're like, what?
What?
and,
Yeah.
and so, for the work that I desperately tried to do and it's not just me, there's a whole teams in every university that do this, but really try to push for that kind of inclusive practice that, why can't we give people slides in advance so they don't need to write down on the board? They can just note take next to, the printed out slide. Why can't we record lectures? Because then people can go back to it and make notes afterwards or listen to it again if that's what they want to do. But I think increasingly, when we look at assessments, certainly the changes that have happened in GCSEs, it's all exam based. That reading and writing and recall is the bit that's really difficult for lots of neurodivergent people, and sometimes extra time doesn't quite cut it. You need, like you said, maybe it's like half an hour afterwards where you're like, just
Exactly.
thought of what it is.
Yeah.
Whereas if you allow people to demonstrate I remember suggesting at a meeting one day with some sort of senior members of the university that, well, why don't we let people choose their assessment? Choose? But actually, if you have somebody that can choose, or perhaps from a limited range of options, but not necessarily interpretive dance or anything, but if you get an opportunity to choose to demonstrate your knowledge in a way that suits you, then you're going to get people working to their strengths and understanding what those strengths are, rather than always understanding that you've got a disorder, you've got a deficit. But that's only because you're set within this rigid system that this is the only way that we're going to measure success. They're barriers. Exams are barriers for lots of people. Look, my brother, who is also couldn't be any more ADHD, he's one of those really annoying people that can look at something 10 minutes before the exam and go in and just regurgitate it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I've never been that. But I think, for some people, they absolutely shine in exams, but for other people, they really don't. And so, then we talk about like the whole kind of funding model that exists around, and if we think about more about school, about the sort of special educational needs, additional needs, well, what does that do to someone's sense of self and aspiration and motivation? Whereas actually, it's not that someone's got additional needs; it's just that the system didn't think about them in the first place.
Yeah. And look, I can't, because as you're talking, I'm thinking to myself, well, I would have done well with having somebody help me transition from school to university. It was a very different expectation. Even transitioning from fifth form to sixth form. Yeah. When I got into sixth form, I did well in our version of GCSEs, which we call CSEs in the Caribbean. I did really well. And I remember I enjoyed math. I did not understand how our teacher taught us at school, and I was doing terribly. And my father sent me to lessons, and the lessons teacher was able to explain in a way that I understood. So I would go into the classroom, and I would just have all of my work there. They would learn whatever. I would go and I would tell the teacher, well, this is what we talked about today. And he would teach. I did not understand how they explained it within the classroom. So when I did my CSCs, I was so convinced that I was going to go into A-levels and I was going to ace everything. And I came out of my A-levels with 2 Ds and an A or whatever, which is that, I did not reach this form level with that math. And it was such I was so overwhelmed by the experience that when I finished A-levels, I worked for a year. I knew I could not go to university because I was like, it was such a struggle to figure out because you are in CSC, the teacher is teaching you at A levels. They had a much bigger expectations of you researching on your own. Nobody had tell me how to research. How do I structure?
Totally.
I
Totally.
had, it was so overwhelming. So when you talk about transition and you talked about things about people haven't considered the needs, and I don't think it is only needs for those who might be neurodiverse. So many people, and this is conversations we've had before, are will benefit.
Yeah.
And because now we are thinking in a more holistic way about what people need, and not just what maybe a small percentage, of 20% or whatever, are going to do well. Strength.
Definitely, and certainly, you know, throughout the 15 years or whatever that I spent in higher education, seeing the mental health crisis, and it is a crisis, you know, go like that, you know, becoming a regular thing where students would start with anxiety and depression at, like, you know, that started at like 13 or something. Well, at what point do we look at, you know, is our education system contributing to that? And okay, there are going to be lots of different factors going on. It's a hard time. It's a hard time in your life at high school. There's, you know, hormones flying and relationships going on and all sorts of different things. But now, you know, and I consider myself one of the lucky ones because I got through school. I got the basic qualifications that I needed that have enabled me to go on and do the things that I wanted to do. But I also see people that didn't get through school or, you know, didn't go to university or didn't complete a degree, and how there's a sort of sense of shame that they carry with them that is unforgivable, because that's not on you. That's on a system that didn't teach, like you say, teach you in the way that suited your needs or assess you in a way that enabled you to show your knowledge and abilities. People that are doing brilliant things now, but still carry that sort of weight and that self-imposed stigma around this kind of, you know, golden goose of education. And I think now, certainly in the UK, that university has become such a rite of passage. That just gets worse and worse. And the sooner we start to really appreciate the worth of things like apprenticeships and different routes into work where people can be practical rather than writing about stuff, you know, can go and make things and do things and show their knowledge in a different way, then it's desperately needed. It's
Yeah.
desperately needed for people's self-worth and
Worth.
self-esteem.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And now lots of the work that I do is then talking to parents who are battling with schools to get support in place for their neurodivergent kids. That ultimately it comes down to a system that hasn't thought about their children, but also a funding model that won't allow for that support to be put in place to, you know, to create that experience. And that's a shameful thing.
Yeah, and because actually the thing that I was wondering about, because you talked about your experience and you had difficulties, but also you've recognized that as part of that process, you have also kind of attained, the levels of education and so forth. So your story isn't as bad. And I wonder if part of that was maybe resources that you had in place from the perspective of maybe family and the type of support that they would have provided for you, having opportunities to maybe explore and think differently about maybe I should try this or I should try this, that you could find a different avenue. Like, for you, what were those resources that were in place that helped you during those hard transitions?
Family, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, as you were talking about your experiences of your sort of extra maths tuition,
Yeah.
unfortunately, my dad was the extra maths tuition. My dad, who was a mathematical genius,
Oh,
and
wow.
me,
I
that
remember
is not,
having that before.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
is not gifted in the art of the sums.
Yeah.
And my dad trying to explain algebra to me, who
Yeah.
didn't, you know, wasn't really fully equipped with patience.
Yeah.
So we got one explanation. Do you get it? No.
No.
What don't you get? None of it. Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we went
Yeah.
round again, and, like, obviously tensions are rising.
Yes.
Tear ducts are starting to twitch.
Yes. For
Yeah,
sure.
and you know, it's but again, finding that place, finding that thing that interests you, and
Yes.
you know, going through school, going through, maybe even going through college, until you find your thing that really kind of fires those neurons and, you know,
Yeah.
neurotransmitters. Do we kind of give due credit to those people that are probably dyslexic but are unbelievably talented in art, but we don't value art GCSE as much as English and maths.
Yeah. And even having parents be open to that exploration, because, and I'm not a parent, so I'm I put in that caveat clear and upfront, and I have no judgment on parents at all, but I do understand that sometimes there's that struggle between wanting to build within the child commitment to do a task that might be hard, but also giving them space if this is not for them, like giving them the space to
Totally.
step away from that and to explore something else. And I know that could be, I could imagine that that's a fine line to kind of figure out what that is, but there really is that need to allow people to explore, like, what is the thing that I am passionate about, because I'm going to be a lot more committed to that than anything else.
Yeah, yeah. And and wouldn't that be a lovely place to be if people had that opportunity to explore
Yeah,
what is it that's your thing, and actually we give equal worth to all of those
across
things,
the board.
and we
Yeah.
help people pursue those rather than it being, well, go and be, I mean, and there was never any pressure from my mum and dad to go and be a lawyer. It was my inner narcissist, I think, that was like, I want to march around in a wig and a gown. Um, it was they were always like, do whatever you want to. My earliest aspiration was sorting out the trolleys at Sainsbury's, which I still can't resist getting them in order for someone that lives a chaotic life most of the time. But I think that that whole thing of finding what it is that gets you, and yeah, and that there is, everything is worthy,
Yeah.
whatever it is, and there's just not enough emphasis on that.
Yeah. What was the hardest thing that you had to overcome when you experienced those failures?
I think I think it's quite, there's a kind of, there's a moment in that, isn't there, where you're at your most vulnerable, you're feeling your most helpless because you don't know, you don't, back to that thing of those decisions, like what do I do now? I had this plan, and even if you don't have a plan as detailed as mine was,
Yeah.
um
You've got
that
something you're working.
that like, now what do I do? I don't know what to do next. I don't know the right way to go. If I make this decision, what are the implications of that? If I do that, if I do nothing, and so people can just get really overwhelmed
And just
with
in
that.
that space alone. Wow. So what helped you in terms of that, in terms of making that decision, in terms of, all right, considering the next phase, and actually having the courage to actually take the next step, as opposed to thinking, oh shoot, suppose I fail here again. Like, what was that? What were those things or that thing that helped you?
Again, I think family, and I think, having, and it's something that I will never take for granted, that, of having parents that said it's okay, okay, it hasn't worked out, but what next? And don't just jump on something. Let's just take stock and let's think about, where we go next with it. And but also, I think it was very much around empowerment, that you make the decision. I don't ever remember, like, my mum or dad ever saying to me, no, you're not doing that, or, well, I mean, certain
Mm.
things, yeah. They
You
didn't
can't
quite like
put
smoking.
off of a plane, kids. No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever. But but those kind of big life decisions, I think, just knowing that they supported me, and knowing that there was almost that, not freedom to fail, but certainly there was never, I never got that they were disappointed in me, or they were, and that's a massive thing, because you think about those kind of levels of burden that people can experience, and if it hasn't worked out in a way that you wanted it to, you're already feeling that guilt, shame, regret, whatever it might be, to then have that compounded by kind of other people's judgments. You can well see how that trauma then comes from that,
Yeah.
from some people. And I wonder if actually, that's the thing that's enabled me to kind of, obviously it was horrible going through it at the time, but kind of reflect on it in a much more neutral way now, rather
Yeah.
than being like, do you know what, it just wasn't meant to be, and this is what I was meant to be doing. Hindsight is always a wonderful thing anyway, isn't it? But I think my failures weren't then compounded by the disappointment and the expectations of other people.
Yeah.
And yeah, thanks, mum and dad.
I normally ask everybody, like, who would be their unsung hero? Who is the person that they would want to shout out in terms of helping them through that feeling? It sounds to me like your family is that for you. I mean, you can mention other people if you want, but it does sound like having that community, that family behind you with their unconditional love and acceptance was very significant in helping you to get through the situation.
Very, very, very significant, and I don't think they have fully appreciated that. Perhaps we've not
Mhm.
fully shared that with them, but
Yeah.
maybe I'll share this link with my mum
Yeah.
afterwards. But, hi, mum. But I think, yeah, I think that is not to be underestimated. And you know, for some people, it's not their family. For some people, it might be friends. But to have your group that get you, that support you, that help you navigate life, because life's tough, and it's not, there's a series of obstacles that you have to kind of navigate and overcome. But I think in those real, like, formative years, that's so important to get that kind of grounding. So I think, even though I've always kind of battled with self-doubt and imposter syndrome and all those things, I think that I have that kind of almost like core strength of knowing that I have that support of my family as well. I'm even going to throw my brother into there as well, but I don't know quite what he does, but he teases me. That's his way of showing love, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I
yeah, having that support, that backup, somebody that helps you mitigate your own self-critic, I think is really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing, that which is the reason why this podcast is so important to me as well, because so many times we go through our failures alone. There are some people who they don't have a person to talk to. They don't understand that, everybody else around is experiencing this have experienced the failure as well. You are not alone. That feeling of being alone is just such a heavy burden to bear, especially when you add up on it all the things that you've said, like what you think maybe other people's expectations, the goals that you think that you may not have achieved, the indecision of trying to figure out, oh, what else can I do? Like, having, even if it's just one person, is really helpful. And I hope, that as part of this, that I can build a community. That's actually ultimately my dream, of being able to build a community of people that, if they can't find it, you know, within their family, their friends, their workplace, or whatever, there's a community that exists, that we understand failure, and we are here to help you work through and to get through that situation.
Yeah,
So yeah.
definitely. And I think that's a lovely, lovely aspiration to have. And certainly loads of, particularly women that I work with now, who perhaps have just got an ADHD or an autism diagnosis, will say the same thing to me. We'll talk about, actually, understanding how my brain works now has helped me to forgive myself for stuff that's happened in the past. So, and that always kind of gets me, on edge, because you just think, well, all of those, whether they be relationship breakdowns, conflict, perceived failures in education, or whatever it might be, all of those take their toll on somebody's mental health and well-being and self-esteem and
Yeah.
aspiration, and all those things that we absolutely have to have if we're to have any chance of navigating our way through this world.
Yeah. 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 So, Kate, for those persons who may be going through a failure experience within the educational sphere, and and are looking for, okay, what do I do? Like, what would be your word of advice for them?
I think it's really important to recognize what, if you are learning something, are you able to express your knowledge and ideas in a way that suits you?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can, then great. But if you can't, if you think, oh, if only I could just talk about this rather than write about this, or if only I could just make something rather than, write about it or whatever, then I think that's where you've got to recognize that actually they're the barriers that are stopping you from demonstrating your strengths and ability. If only my trombone playing was regarded more highly, or if only my ability to create papier-mâché
Yeah.
objects
Yes.
was held in the highest of esteem. Because I tell you what, look at our creative industries. full of neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder how many GCSEs they've probably got between them, but some of our most, you know, celebrated artists globally, you know, probably had challenges going through school and trying to navigate that space to get to your place of passion. Hold tight and just don't, you know, don't give up. If you've got a passion, pursue it. Don't let anyone stop you. There will be yellow brick roads along the way. But you know, if it is meant to be, and if you're good at it, you will find it, or it will find you.
Yeah, love that. Kate, it has been a pleasure to talk to you. There are so many other things that were in my mind in terms of, you know, talking about like navigating that failure from the perspective of a friendship sound. What did that look like for you? So many parts of this conversation that we could have, but you know, within the time, it was great. I am so glad that you came and you said, yes, let me share this. I fully
My pleasure.
appreciate it.
I'm always happy to talk to you, Alison. You know I am.
We could talk for hours. I mean, we could talk for so many hours, but
so many hours.
I know.
I mean, there's probably a Guinness World Record in there.
I am saying we should look to see longest podcast recording. Can we do
this? 0 listeners.
Exactly. Anyway, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Kate, for telling us your story. Now, if you want to connect with Kate and find out more about the work she does, check out our show notes for details. If you enjoy the podcast and want to support us, tell a friend or leave a review on your favorite podcast app. You can also follow us on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube at Best Fails Podcast. If you have your own best fail story that you would like to share, send us an email at info@mybestfails.com. Have you had a similar experience to Kate? I would love to hear about it. What was your major takeaway from the experience? Write us a note or record a voice memo and send it to us at info@mybestfails.com, and we just might play it on a future episode. If you are navigating or processing your own failure and would like a safe space to reflect and explore what it means for you, visit our show notes to book some time with me. Remember, shame dies when stories are told in safe places. And until next time.